We're going to go ahead and get started. I know we have governors off in different directions. We have some very special guests here that we want to hear from. We want to welcome our guests in the audience as well. But this begins our closing plenary session and work of the 2008 winter meeting of the National Governors Association. We want to welcome to the plenary session our guests, which I'll introduce in just a moment. But we've enjoyed hearing from many experts and engaging commentators on a wide variety of topics over these last few days, ranging from biofuels and energy efficiency to National Guard issues and so many others. And I hope that you have, as I have, found the discussion helpful and informative. For much of the past several days, though, we've also worked on energy issues as it relates to how can we make it better through technology, through innovation, through commercialization of emerging technologies. And we have two individuals here today who are very deep and serious students of these issues and the opportunities to utilize emerging technologies for a cleaner energy future, and also have the potential for commercializing in ways that might be helpful to our states in terms of job and investment and economic development. Today we're joined by James Woolsey and also Dr. John Dewar, who are working to lead us on this new path. And I'll first introduce Jim Woolsey. Jim Woolsey is perhaps the best known as the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. As such, he is particularly concerned and attuned about security concerns resulting from our addiction to oil. He will soon be a venture partner with Vantage Point and a senior executive advisor to Booz Allen currently. He's an individual who has served our country in a variety of capacities in many ways. We're grateful that he would take time to be with us today at the National Governors Association. Please help me welcome our speaker, Jim Woolsey.
Thank you, Governor. I was very honored to be asked to be with you today, of course, but to tell you the truth, since I spent 22 years as a Washington lawyer, and then I spent some time out at the CIA in the Clinton administration, I'm actually honored to be invited into any polite company for any purpose whatsoever. I thought I would start by sharing with you some thoughts about an aspect of our energy structure that has, from what I've been told, not been addressed, as well as one that has. I would divide up the serious problems we have to deal with in international affairs and in world politics into the malignant and the malevolent. Malevolent problems are problems like terrorism that someone is actually trying to cause. Malignant ones that we're not trying to bring about, but because we are, as a society, sort of doing the functional equivalent of smoking 5 packs a day of cigarettes and putting a huge amount of carbon into the atmosphere, we are creating the risk of catastrophic change at some point in the future. Now, the people who focus often on malevolent problems, such as terrorism, often have something of a blind spot about the malignant ones. And vice versa. People who focus on climate change sometimes figure, well, somebody else is going to deal with the terrorism issues. I want to say a word about each of these and suggest to you that there may be more synergy in dealing with these two very important sets of problems than we have heretofore thought. In terms of malevolence, we, of course, have several kinds of serious problems with respect to energy. Our electricity grid is extremely vulnerable. It has gotten more vulnerable in recent years with privatization because we've layered on top of a highly balkanized set of electricity grids and utilities a national system, a continent-wide system, really, for buying and selling electricity. Power lines, transmission lines are congested. A tree branch is touched by a sagging power line in Cleveland, Ohio 4 years ago, and 50 million consumers are without electricity for days. Now, including in eastern Canada. Now, we tried to take a leaf from the book of the South Park kids there and blame Canada for that outage. But the Canadians were on to us, and in their polite way, they pointed out that Cleveland is, in fact, south of Lake Erie, not north of Lake Erie. And we had to own up to the fact that it had been our power line. The interesting thing is that terrorists are a lot smarter than tree branches. All they have to do is read the reports of the critical infrastructure commissions and the new report of the Defense Science Board that I chaired a portion of that's on the web, and they can see that there are very substantial vulnerabilities to our electricity grid that unfortunately can be exploited relatively easily, and we need to move to deal with them. Often there are institutional barriers at the state level, by the way, for public utility commissions in making some of these things happen. Another type of potential malevolent threat is the threat of terrorism funded by our oil purchases. We borrow over $1 billion a day now at today's oil prices to finance just our oil imports. That's not oil as a whole, that's just our imports. A fair chunk of that goes to the Middle East, as it does from a number of other countries. And so if you wonder who is paying for those madrasas in various Middle Eastern countries where little 8-year-old boys are being taught to be terrorists and infected with the Wahhabi Saudi ideology, you don't need to look too much further than the person you see when you get out to charge your gasoline at a filling station, if you'll just turn the rear view mirror a few inches before you get out. Because if you're looking into your own eyes, you know who's paying for those madrasas to teach those little boys to be terrorists. Not only that, Tom Friedman, I know, talked to you the last few days. Tom has a wonderful formulation. He says that the price of oil and the path of freedom run in opposite directions. Because oil can, if it comes into a central government that is not yet a democracy, like, say, Norway, but if it comes into a central government that is a dictatorship or autocratic kingdom, it tends to enhance the power of the central government without letting alternative sources of economic and political power build up, and it thus tends, as Tom says, to move things in a non-democratic and autocratic direction, and one need look only at the behavior of Messrs. Putin, Chavez, and Ahmadinejad over the course of the last 2 or 3 years as oil has shot up to see what Tom Friedman means. Of course, also there is vulnerability in the Middle East to attacks on the oil infrastructure. Al-Qaeda's tried 2 against Abqaiq and been thwarted both times. Should they be able to take out the sulfur clearing towers at Abqaiq in northeastern Saudi Arabia, the largest oil production facility in the world, they would probably send oil up for a year or more to at least $200 a barrel, probably more. So we have a full set of problems that we need to deal with in the vulnerabilities of our energy infrastructure. Electricity, on the one hand, which outside Hawaii and 1 or 2 places in the continental United States uses relatively little oil. So only about 2% of our electricity comes from oil. But the oil problem is not so much an electricity generation problem as it is a problem of dependence for transportation purposes. Transportation in the U.S. is about 97% oil products. And as a result of that, we have a situation in which those who produce oil and who dominate oil, OPEC essentially, hold a great deal of leverage over the rest of the world. We don't do much that's useful at all by just moving our consumption patterns around. If we buy less from the Middle East and more from Norway, the Europeans just buy more from the Middle East and less from Norway. It doesn't do any good.